So, phytoestrogens, Cordula, do you mind explaining what they are, and the science behind why some soya products are preferable to others when it comes to endometriosis?
So if you think of phytoestrogens, they're a bit like our own estrogen in the body, but they're about 1,000 times less effective. And because of this effect, there's been quite a lot of research and scientific research as well, if they're okay for us or not. But unfortunately, so far the results are actually quite mixed. So very high intake of phytoestrogens may actually worsen the recurrence risk of endometriosis. So once you had a surgery, you have a very high intake of soya product, it may worsen the recurrence risk of having it again. Also, there's a bit of research that shows that people who have a really high intake as baby, for example, so soy formula or in childhood, they may also be more at risk of developing endo in the first place. But it really depends on sort of genetics as well, because when you look at data from Japan, for example, where they have really high levels of estrogen, phytoestrogens in their diet, they don't have this effect. So I would normally say to people, once to twice per week having some tofu, tempeh edamame, for example, is absolutely fine. If you're vegan, a couple more servings are probably still okay, but otherwise I wouldn't do more than that. So basically not soy milk, tempeh, tofu, all these things all day long. But also remember there's a positive effect of soy intake during menopause, and it can reduce the risk of hot flushes as well, but you do need quite a lot. So if you've endo and you're going through perimenopause or menopause, is probably not the right time to have high amounts. But if you don't have endo, you could increase your amount a little bit to help with that.
Fab, thank you very much. Um, and do phytoestrogens impact MCAS?
No research, sadly. I did a deep dive. I tried to find something, but I haven't found anything. So nothing at this stage. No. What about you, Chloe? Do you have something to add to that? This one?
Yeah, no, there's no research on that at all. But MCAS and diet is really poorly researched, and women's health and diet and women's health generally is really poorly researched to put them together. And yeah, unfortunately, there's nothing. But yeah.
Should we do the next one? So the next question is, what do we know as to why estrogen and histamine influence each other?
So estrogen can push up the histamine levels in our body. It can activate mast cells. So often the patients that I see at certain times of their menstrual cycle, if they have them, will have flare-ups of their MCAS. So potentially those times are when estrogen levels are raised. So maybe just before ovulation and then a week before your period. Um, and that can influence diet because actually if your body's already overproducing histamine, your mast cells are already activated. Some people find that they are super sensitive to foods at certain times of their menstrual cycle. And during the perimenopause, when your estrogen can be all over the place and higher than in a normal menstrual cycle, that can make it really tough and can change tolerance to foods. And as well as that, progesterone, another hormone really important in our menstrual cycle, can actually stabilize mast cells. When our body are under huge amounts of stress, whether that's physical or emotional, our body's progesterone production can reduce, making these mast cells more unstable. Um, During our period, progesterone levels are really low, making those mast cells more unstable. And during the perimenopause, progesterone is one of the first things to decrease. So actually these mast cells can become more unstable. So those are kind of time periods where people can become much more sensitive to food and might need a bit more support in terms of getting the right nutrition, getting food into them generally. So hormone levels can definitely affect diet as well, and how much people can tolerate with MCAS. Did you have anything else to add to that, Cordula?
Great answer. I like it.
Um, and do you have any suggestions for those with symptoms of relative estrogen excess and relative low progesterone during the perimenopause?
It's a bit of a long-winded answer, to be honest, because there's so much to cover when it comes to that. And just bear in mind as well, the perimenopause can last up to 10 years. So this is really a long chunk of a women's lives. So I would say first look at your overall eating pattern, what you're having most of the time. And I will probably focus most on something like the Mediterranean diet or an anti-inflammatory eating pattern. The two are slightly different, but honestly, don't worry too much. If you Google Mediterranean diet, it gives you some good guidelines on what it includes. But it really essentially is just a very, very nutrient-rich and healthy eating pattern with lots of antioxidants, omega-3 fats, and all these kind of things, all the things that you need for your body to function properly and to produce those hormones properly. Then I would also look at blood sugar management, which is really, really important because that worsens during the perimenopause time. And then if you want to go a little bit more detailed with this, try to look at stress management as well. I know this is really, really hard, and it always makes us feel like this is our fault for causing this. Or, when doctors say like, oh, it's stress, just stress a little bit less. It's not like this, but if you are very stressed, like Chloe said, it can worsen your progesterone production, which then of course can make the whole things worse. If you want to look at more specific foods, so like individual foods that you can add, so for progesterone production, you need enough vitamin B6 in your diet. And vitamin B6 is a little bit of a funny one. You just as an FYI, I should mention this, it's probably not the one I would recommend supplementing unless you speak to a doctor or a dietitian, just because you can overdo it with it. But from food, you can get it from chickpeas and other legumes, like beans, for example. You get it from meat and fish, but also potatoes and bananas. So if you have a bit of a varied diet, you should technically get enough in your diet. Another really important one is magnesium. Magnesium is all the rage at the moment. I feel on social media, everyone is talking about it, but we can also get enough from food, normally because it is found in a lot of different plant foods. So nuts and seeds are really high, especially pumpkin seeds. They're fantastic. Legumes, again, so lentils, chickpeas, beans, all these kind of things. Potatoes are all quite good sources for magnesium. So of course, if you have MCAS and you don't tolerate one of these, just try to replace it with something else that you do tolerate. So if you don't tolerate a certain nut, try to get pumpkin seeds in your diet, for example, for your magnesium. And then two more I can mention. One of them is zinc. Zinc is really important for progesterone production as well. I personally think that there's often females that are quite low in their zinc intake, but it is related to your protein intake. So if you have a good amount of protein, breakfast, lunch, dinner, you also tend to have good zinc intake. So it's a bit more difficult for vegans and vegetarians because the best zinc sources are animal products, unfortunately. And then the last one I can mention is vitamin C. Really important again for progesterone production. It's an antioxidant, so what that means, it fights inflammation as well. So particularly important for somebody who might have endometriosis, for example, on top of this as well. And you can find vitamin C in lots of different fruits and vegetables. So it's like citrus, kiwi, berries. But if you're struggling with any of those, peppers are a really, really good source as well. So they can also be included regularly. So these are sort of the individual foods. So think first, overall eating pattern, Mediterranean diet, look after your blood sugar levels, and then try to include those other foods. I just wanted to mention one more thing about soy. And so if you do want to include a little bit of soy to help with hot flushes, for example, or with this estrogen excess, you can try and take 20 milligrams of soy isoflavones per day, which is the equivalent of a big glass of soy milk or about 80 grams of tofu or tempeh. So it's quite a lot, as you can think. But if you already drink soy milk, if you're about 4 mils per day, or a good chunk of tofu basically is the right amount. Just don't do that if you have endo or any other hormonal condition that you struggle with. But if you don't have endo, absolutely fine to try and include that. It may also help with cholesterol management, which is another thing that can worsen during this perimenopause time. Long answer. Chloe, do you have something to add?
The only thing I was going to add was the blood sugar control part was that I see a lot of patients who have MCAS and reactive hypoglycemia. So what that means is your body produces too much insulin in response to certain things like often refined carbohydrates, so sort of white carbohydrates or sugar that's released really quickly. Your body overproduces insulin and then people get a massive crash in their blood sugars and they go too low. What that can do is can send you into fight or flight response. So produce a load more histamine, activate all those mast cells, which is absolutely not the cycle you want to get into. So I think actually trying to manage those blood sugar levels through changing your diet, like low glycemic index carbs, so slow releasing carbs, so swapping things like mashed potato for new potatoes with skins if you could tolerate them, or and pairing them with healthy fats as well and protein and making changes like that can actually help. So I think that blood sugar management is so key because if you're constantly in these fight or flight, again, that's putting that stress on your body, reducing your progesterone production. So it can be a really key part of helping people's situations. So yeah,
What you
that's
just
the
said,
only
I
thing.
literally just read about 50% of women with perimenopause are most likely insulin resistance. And this is again where the research is lacking because perimenopause is a really difficult time to do research in because hormones can be all over the place and up and down. So researchers don't love doing research during this time. But yeah, it's a really, really good point that Chloe pointed out with the blood sugar management. Yeah.
Um, and someone has just asked a question that they've heard people with endo can be chronically low in magnesium. If you can't get enough through diet, what type is best to supplement?
Okay, yes, that's absolutely true. You probably don't need a mega dose, so up to 400 milligrams per day is safe as per the NHS, but I would start a little bit lower. So either do magnesium citrate or glycinate, bisglycinate, but stay away from magnesium oxide. So magnesium oxide is really poorly absorbed. It acts a little bit as a laxative. This is great if you're chronically constipated, you can try it, but I would otherwise absolutely stay away from it. And unfortunately, when you just walk into the normal supermarket or Boots or Superdrug, for example, most of the magnesium on the shelf will be magnesium oxide. So just look at the back of the pack and have a look through. So you want either magnesium citrate or magnesium glycinate or bisglycinate. There are some other versions out there as well, but these are the common ones that you can find. And I would start at about 100 milligrams. You can take it in the evening if you want. It might help with sleep a little bit and just see how you go. But if you react badly to it, if your bowels don't tolerate it, then just try and switching to another product.
Yeah, and from a gastro point of view, if you do have gastro symptoms alongside, especially if they're diarrhea related, I would probably go for magnesium glycinate or bisglycinate, just because the citrate can have a bit of a laxative effect as well. Um, and yeah, if you are sensitive to fillers and things like that, obviously choose a filler-free one. But yeah. Uh,
Next question is actually very much on topic. Any suggestions for chronic diarrhea in those with underlying symptomatic hypermobility and conditions including severe endometriosis and also symptoms of adenomyosis, MCAS, and dysautonomia that are all severe?
It's really difficult, and it's something I see really commonly that this can result in these conditions can result in diarrhea and any other gastro symptoms. So I see a lot of people with constipation as well. But if you are experiencing diarrhea, um, start with the basics. So try little steps that aren't going to be really restrictive. So removing things like artificial sweetness if you haven't already. I know a lot of people with MCAS will have already done that way before they come and see me. Um, Avoiding sort of high fat foods if that's appropriate. Maybe it's not if you're trying to gain weight or if you've lost loads of weight, which is why it's important to get specific advice. If you're having loads of caffeine, I mean, it's not something I commonly see in patients with MCAS and POTS that they're having a lot of caffeine because it's often something that they can't tolerate, but it is something to look at if you are. Um, Fiber manipulation, I would say, is really important. So for some people, it's about reducing fiber. For some people, it's increasing it. Um, sometimes it's increasing certain types of fiber. So I often use a type of soluble fiber called psyllium husk. Um, and I find it really helpful because actually it thickens loose stools and softens hard ones. So if you get a bit of both as well, it can kind of balance you out. Um, if I was seeing someone that had chronic diarrhea and hypermobility, I would also want to know why. Like, I would want to check that things like small intestinal bacterial overgrowth have been ruled out, that celiac disease have been ruled out, because that can be much more common, especially if you have things like POTS alongside it. Um, I'd want to know lots of things and check that it had been fully investigated first. Um, we would look at things like meal pattern. So what are you actually managing to eat? Because in my experience, if you're having these horrible symptoms, the most normal reaction is, well, let's not eat, because quite honestly, why would you want to eat when you're getting such bad diarrhea? So that's kind of a really normal reaction. So actually, can we get more plant foods in? Can we look at getting a healthier gut microbiome? Is that going to help? In some cases, there is evidence for like specific probiotics for diarrhea. So you want a specific probiotic to do a specific thing. So sometimes we might look at probiotics, sometimes we might look at prebiotics. Prebiotics are basically types of fiber which feed your gut bacteria. And there's some that has specific evidence to do certain jobs. Um, we'd also do something like a food and symptom diary. So look at what foods are triggering this. Is it happening every single day? Does it matter what you eat, or are there specific patterns as to what's contributing? Um, Stress is often part of people's picture. It's never the whole one, but obviously symptoms are stressful. MCAS can be really stressful. It can result in a lot of stress. There's a huge gut-brain connection, and there is specific evidence for gut symptoms and specific therapies. So things like gut-directed hypnotherapy, cognitive behavioral therapy. If there's pain involved or discomfort, like abdominal massage, diaphragmatic breathing, there's loads of stuff that can support diet as well and gut symptoms. Um, and also, a dietitian can prescribe it, but we can definitely recommend that GPs look at things like medication to help control those symptoms so that someone can actually eat an adequate diet. Um, is there anything that you would add, Cordula?
No, I think you covered it. Yeah, I really like that you said as well the testing. I think sometimes doctors they just see symptoms and it's like, oh, it's IBS, it's okay, just go away with it. So just advocate for yourself. So if you have lots of chronic illnesses, conditions, autoimmune conditions, I would say as well, just get tested for celiac disease. Make sure there's nothing else underlying. There's actually a question. The next question is about SIBO, but I was just going to say SIBO could be an issue, but that might not be tested through the NHS. But just yeah, that you advocate for yourself if you can. Should I just ask the next question? So, SIBO is said to be very common in endo patient. Is it also common in MCAS?
Yes, it's something I see all the time actually. And there's a really good podcast on MCAS. The name escapes me, but it's from America. It's hosted by Tanya Dempsey. And there was a brilliant gastroenterologist on there that talked about how SIBO could drive MCAS. There was also a study that looked at the occurrence of SIBO in MCAS patients, and it found that it was present in 30% of 139 MCAS patients versus 10% of 30 controls. So it was more common. I mean, it was one study. We need way more research on like how does it drive MCAS and how can we stop the massive link between SIBO and MCAS and what comes first? Is it chicken or is it egg? Um, but yeah, there is a link. It does seem to happen fairly often. Whether that's because of other gastro issues that often occur, whether that's because a lot of people are also hypermobile and that can change how quickly or food moves through our gut. Also, some people with MCAS might be on proton pump inhibitors for reflux symptoms, and they can increase the occurrence of SIBO. For those of you that don't know what SIBO is, it's small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. We want most of your bacteria to be in your large bowel. When it overgrows in your small bowel, it can cause inflammation. It can affect how histamine is broken down because the enzyme which breaks down the histamine in our body is sits in your small intestine. So yeah, there does seem to be a link.
We stay with SIBO. I've got one more SIBO question. So, is SIBO recognized and tested for within the health service?
It should be. It does depend on the gastroenterologist. It does depend on the trust. There are UK guidelines. It is a recognized condition. The reason some gastroenterologists don't like to test for it is because the test can give false positives. So it can tell you have SIBO when you actually don't. So some gastroenterologists don't feel like the testing is accurate enough. The testing for it is breath testing. So you drink a solution, either lactulose or glucose, but usually lactulose, and then you blow into a tube every 15 minutes for 3 hours, and it tests specific types of gas. NHS trusts do often send out postal tests now, so you can do it at home. But yeah, a lot of local trusts do it, but it's not a first line test. So if you went to them with gut symptoms, they probably wouldn't do it straight away. And the treatment for SIBO, the only evidence-based treatment we have is a specific type of antibiotic depending on what gas they find, whether it's hydrogen predominant or methane predominant. But recurrence is really common, and especially if the underlying cause isn't treated. I see a lot of people who have chronic constipation, and maybe that's why they got SIBO. And unless that chronic constipation is targeted, and we can get things moving, then the probability of that SIBO coming back is really high. Dietary strategies can definitely help with targeting that constipation. However, I understand how challenging that is if you've also got MCAS and can't add specific things and specific foods. So yes, and if SIBO isn't recognised within an NHS trust, you can get another opinion. You can see a different gastroenterologist. There are private tests that cost about £140. If that's available to you, you can always get a private test and go put it under the nose of the gastroenterologist. So yeah, there are options. I've just had a couple of questions about SIBO. So do H2 blockers promote SIBO or just PPIs? So yeah, anything that can reduce acid can promote the overgrowth of bacteria in your small intestine. So yes, they can contribute. The other is, can the hydrogen sulfide type of SIBO be particularly awful? We don't actually have we don't have really good evidence that hydrogen sulfide SIBO is any different at the moment. It's not something that's recognised by UK gastroenterologists. It's talked a lot about in the USA, but it's in the NHS, it's not recognised as a separate entity to hydrogen or methane based SIBO. Do you have anything to add on that, Cordula?
I think the only thing I would say is maybe get a second opinion if you can't get the test with your current gastroenterologist through the NHS. I'm a little bit concerned when sometimes people say, oh, I've bought this test from the US and now it's not recognized. So if you do buy your own test, do a bit of research, pick something that is from the UK if you can. Just make sure that it's something that the doctors actually would recognize. Anything that is a bit too alternative, a bit too out there, they will just say like, no, we're not recognizing that. And you end up spending a lot of money on these kind of things. Yeah. So, but second opinion is always a good option as well. You can ask a GP to refer you. And on that note, yeah, your GP might not know about SIBO either. Some do, some don't. Some still don't recognize it, but yeah, NHS technically does recognize it.
And just while we're on the gut, someone's also asked, does bile acid diarrhea often occur with MCAS? It's not something I frequently see with MCAS, but it's something that should be tested for if you're having ongoing diarrhea, especially if you find it happens with fat, if it's like yellow, really foul smelling. So although it's not commonly linked, it can definitely happen in anyone. So it's thought to be as commonly as common cause for diarrhea as celiac disease. So actually, it's fairly common in the general population. So it should definitely be tested if you're getting diarrhea. So Cordula, so other than fiber, are there any specific plant foods most helpful for those with endometriosis and MCAS symptoms?
I actually love this question, but I would love to say like all plants. I'm a big fan of, just including more plant foods in general. So again, I would just start with sort of the Mediterranean diet as your overall eating pattern. Start with those principles and replace things that you can't tolerate. So if it's something like oily fish, for example, if you really don't do well with oily fish, you could consider a supplement if you want to make sure that you include some maybe frozen fresh fish as well. It will have much lower levels of omega-3s, which are the fats in oily fish that can help with inflammation and reduce pain. It will have much lower levels, but it's still a good food to include regularly as well. And then when it comes to plant foods, I would very much focus on things like nuts and seeds, extra virgin olive oil, avocados, to get those heart healthy fats into your diet that help with hormone production as well. And then lots and lots of colorful fruits and vegetables. So what I usually say to people is try to aim to have 2 to 3 different colors on the plate. It's just a bit easier than trying to remember. It's like, oh, the dietitian said I need to have vitamin C. How am I going to do this? So if you can remember one thing, it's just focus on 3 different colors on the plate at main meals. That can really help. It could just be a second colored peppers, for example, if you want to make it easier, a handful of spinach or rocket, for example. Spinach is a bad example. Rocket could be another option, or kale, and whatever you tolerate, really. And then I would really say vitamin C is probably the big issue for people with MCAS, because obviously vitamin C is found in citrus fruit, for example, certain berries. So if you don't do well with those, definitely try the peppers and include them in your diet regularly. And you could also try kiwi fruit. So I'm a huge fan of kiwi fruits. They can help with constipation. They can also help with sleep if you have 1 to 2 of them in the evening. So I really like them, and they have a good amount of vitamins. So if you tolerate them, include them as well. And I know the question was specific about plant foods, but I just wanted to mention red meat. There is a bit of research that suggests too much red meat worsens endometriosis. We really need a bit more good quality research. It really isn't very good quality. So if you're a meat eater, do not fear. I would just say maybe no more than 2 servings of red meat per week, and choose the leaner cuts if you can, and otherwise focus on chicken or fish, for example, rather than the red meat. And definitely also have some chickpeas, lentils, if you tolerate them, beans, those kind of things in your diet regularly, because they're fantastic for bowel health as well. So all plants, basically. Yeah. But if it is something you don't tolerate, just try to think like, okay, I don't do well with this. Can I replace it with something else in my diet, rather than just cutting it all out, and focus on those 3 different colors on the plate.
And yeah, I'm obsessed with fiber from an MCAS point of view, because there is some evidence that it can help stabilize mast cells, and I'm just obsessed with it anyway from a gut health point of view. If you have a low fiber diet, don't suddenly chuck all the fiber at your gut, because it won't be happy with you. So do it really gradually if you're going to do it. Something I always like to say is, like, a lot of people think because of the Siggy list or other lists they've seen that beans and pulses are high in histamine, whereas actually when we've looked at studies, all beans and pulses apart from lentils are absolutely fine in terms of histamine. So if you know you have a reaction to them, obviously do not reintroduce them. But if you are just avoiding them because of a list, try 1 bean at a time, like a tiny amount, and see how your body copes with them. If you haven't been eating beans and pulses for a long time, you will need to gradually increasing them so your body gets used to it. But they're a fab thing to have in your diet. The other thing I was going to say is omega-3 oily fish supplements actually aren't thought to be high histamine. So it's not thought to be the actual oil of the fish that is high histamine. So some people, even if you can't eat oily fish, can tolerate the supplements. So it's something to think about, because omega-3, like I say, thought to be anti-inflammatory, can be really, really good for us. And how
Just
much protein should women aim for, and does it change across the life stage, especially perimenopause or menopause?
Am I allowed to say one thing about omega-3 supplements?
Oh,
I'm
perfect.
very, very passionate about them. I'm a big fan. Now, I would definitely say, so there was this, I need to go give you a bit of background. There was this study that was done in Australia and New Zealand where they grabbed a whole bunch of omega-3 supplements from the shelves, analyzed them, and tried to figure out what the quality is of those products. And they found something like 90% of them were damaged before they even reached the consumer. And damaged oils are not great for our health. Unfortunately, that study had to be pulled because of industry pressure. So literally the supplement companies did not like the answer, and they make them pull the study. There was nothing wrong with the study. I read the study before it was pulled. So I would say this is probably the one supplement where I would spend a little bit of money and do a bit of research that you're happy with the product that you're getting. Give it a bit of a smell. If they smell off, it's probably not a good thing to have. And just check the other ingredients as well, because they quite often add like citrusin, for example, to cover up the flavors, for example. So if you don't tolerate that, pick another one. But any other supplements, I'm usually not that picky with, but these are the ones I would just go for something that you know has a big turnover. So you know in the shop it's getting moved really quickly, and never ever get anything that is like a year supply of omega-3s from Amazon, because they're not very stable. So you cannot have them in the house for a year, even if you store them properly. So I would say a month or 2 supply, maybe 3 months, and then get a fresh stock as well, just to get the fresh ones. Sorry, completely off topic, but I just wanted to mention this.
No, that's so helpful. Thank you. And someone on that has put, if vegetarian, algae omega-3 supplements straight from the source, what maximum dose is recommended?
You can't really overdo it, to be honest, with omega-3s. And the only vegan ones that come in really high doses are Vegetology and Vivo Life. And even them, they are lower than what you will get with a fish oil, to be honest. So you can't really overdo it on those levels. And to be honest, when people, so I test omega-3s with my clients, they're often really, really low. It takes 3 to 6 months to normalize the level before you even get an optimal result. So that being said, I would say, like, if you take a really, really high dose, speak to a doctor, pharmacist, or dietitian, because it can increase the risk of bleeding. So if you have a surgery coming up, for example, pregnant women, good example as well, I would usually stop it before giving birth or having the surgery just for a couple of weeks, and then you can restart it again. That's the only risk. But most people honestly need a little bit more than what we think. And I think the UK is a little bit behind with that research as well, that we don't have any guidelines that are very clear around it. Most of us probably need more. And I think especially women with endo, they're just burning through their omega-3s. They need so much more than other people. So yeah.
Really helpful. Thank you.
So you said do you want to repeat the question again?
Yeah,
Is that okay?
repeat. How much protein should women aim for, and how does it change across the life stage?
So before perimenopause, menopause, the recommendation is about 0.75 grams per kg of body weight. So calculate from your weight 0.75 grams per kg, basically. That will get you somewhere around 50, 60, 70, 80 grams of protein. If you're a meat eater, you do not need to worry about this. You basically get there pretty easily. If you have protein at breakfast, lunch, and dinner, absolutely fine. Of course, with MCAS, there might be a few foods that you might not be okay with. So trying to find an alternative. I find breakfast is probably the most difficult one to get a little bit of a higher protein source, because some people might not tolerate dairy, which is great. So that is a bit more difficult than at breakfast. If you can eat eggs, that's a great protein source as well. But if you have meat, I wouldn't worry about it. During perimenopause and menopause, you can start aiming for slightly higher levels. So then it's probably about 1 to 1.2 grams per kgs. So I don't really want people to calculate all of this and really try to remember this, because it's really stressful. It just adds more stress to your day. But just think again, like each meal and snack that you're having, can you have some kind of source of protein in there? And just repeat, proteins are your meat, your fish, dairy products, if you tolerate them, eggs, and legumes such as chickpeas or lentils. But honestly, you need quite a lot of lentils, chickpeas, or beans to get a good amount of protein. So if you have MCAS or sensitive gut and you're only having a very, very small amount, it might not quite be enough. You can definitely also try tempeh or tofu or corn products, so the corn with the QUORN. Just pick the really unprocessed version, so like the mince, for example, and see if you tolerate that in small amounts. That's another good source of protein. I would definitely say protein is not enough. So especially in perimenopause and menopause, I would then also focus on a bit of strength training if you have the energy for it. So it doesn't have to be anything major. You don't have to go to the gym for that. But if you can, sort of 2 to 3 times per week, some strength training with body weight exercises, yoga, Pilates, just something to maintain the muscle mass. Because unfortunately, as we go through menopause, our muscle mass is decreasing over time, unfortunately. Chloe, anything you wanted to add?
No, that's fab. Nothing to add on that one.
Okay, next one. How to meet iron requirements with MCAS and endometriosis.
Fab. I'm obsessed with iron. If anyone follows me on social media, me and Cordula were talking before, I'm always posting about how iron needs to be checked and properly compared against guidelines, and that doesn't always happen. So I see so many women who complain of fatigue and their ferritin is low, but they've been told it's normal. So if you have had a ferritin check, so that is your iron stores, and it's under 30 and been told it's normal, it is not. Anything under 30 should be treated as iron deficiency. It can cause fatigue, it can cause hair loss. It can cause so many symptoms, and it isn't always picked up on. And even though, we'd just be looking at iron deficient under 30, most women feel much better when it's way over 50. And especially if you've got POTS, we do have research that we want ferritin over 50 to help reduce symptoms. So the actual question before I went off on my high horse again was how to meet iron requirements for MCAS and endo. It can be really hard to maintain your iron if you're a woman with periods full stop, but also if they're heavy. and you're constantly losing periods every month. And if you're going through the perimenopause and might have started HRT, some women find they have irregular bleeding, so might be having periods every 2 weeks and therefore lose even more iron, and therefore it can be even more difficult to maintain. So regular testing is key. So if you've already been identified as having iron deficiency, then we'd want to be checking it probably 3 monthly, especially if we're being supplemented. That doesn't often happen. Um, Often we need supplements, even if you've got up to normal. I see a lot of people who take the prescribed course, stop them, and then just end up iron deficient again because there's nothing to pick that iron up in between. They just go through a cycle of being iron deficient all the time. So sometimes we need an interim supplement anyway, which isn't prescribable. Some of these can cause huge issues with gastro symptoms like constipation. There are certain types like gentle iron or iron bisglycinate, which can cause less gastro symptoms. There are also things like iron water. They're a much lower dose, but better than nothing if you can tolerate them. So often they are needed. In terms of food, red meat is the best source. However, I have many patients that can't tolerate red meat, or don't want to because they're vegan or vegetarian. So sometimes that isn't the answer. We don't absorb iron as well from plant-based foods. So in that situation, you probably will need a supplement. You can get it from things like green leafy veg, legumes, and you can increase absorption by having with something with vitamin C in, like orange juice. But if you're on a low histamine diet, that might not be tolerated, so you could have it with something like peppers. But it can be really, really tough for women to keep their iron levels up. Do you have anything to add to that, Cordula?
No, no, great. I could also mention the Lucky Iron Fish if anyone wants to use that. I've done that before when I was desperate, when clients really couldn't get their iron up. You do need a bit of citric acid in your food, so that's the first thing. But there's a bit in most foods, but basically it's a little iron looking fish. Basically, you can pop it into your food. Great if you make a stew, soup, those kind of things, and it will transfer a little bit of iron to the food. If you have some old cast iron pans in the cupboard, they actually transfer a little bit of food, a little bit of iron to the food as well. They're not great to cook with, I have to admit that, but if you want to try the Lucky Iron Fish, I think sometimes people are so desperate to maintain their iron levels, you might have to try everything just to optimize it and test it regularly, but you can definitely try that as well if you want.
Yeah, I came across that a few years ago, and it's been really helpful actually for those people that really can't tolerate supplements. How can I combine the low histamine approach with blood sugar friendly eating?
It's not always the easiest, I will admit that. So I will definitely go first, like choose your protein sources. So have a think, what do you actually tolerate? So chicken is great, fish, frozen is best, it might be white fish. Eggs, if you tolerate them, fresh cheeses might be a good option, like cottage cheese as well. And then, like Chloe mentioned before, chickpeas, legumes, lentils, if you tolerate them in larger quantities. If you really only manage like a teaspoon or tablespoon at a meal, it's probably not the best source. And otherwise, have a think of some vegan options as well, which could be tofu, tempeh, if you tolerate them again, or this corn as well. And then you want to pair this protein with whole grain carbohydrates. So what whole grain carbohydrates are is basically carbohydrates as close to nature as possible. So if you think of an oat, for example, you have an oat grain first, and it gets milled, and then you have a wholemeal oat, it gets milled a bit more, and then you end up with those oats that are in the little sachets, for example. So try to have as many whole grains in your diet as possible. So it could be oats, for example, brown rice is great, quinoa is another great source, multigrain seeded slice of bread, for example, if you tolerate that. It can be gluten-free, of course. And so pair your carbohydrates with protein, fat, and fiber, because this pairing will slow down the release of the sugars into the bloodstream. So it makes your, rather than having a bit of a blood sugar spike after your meals, it will be sort of this sustained energy production that you get from that meal. So just think of pair your carbohydrates with protein, fat, and fiber. This can really help main meals. And then, of course, try to limit any sweets or treats. But if you're hungry between meals, absolutely fine to eat something as well. For good blood sugar management, you may need to eat every 3 to 4 hours anyway, especially if you suffer from fatigue as well. So most people have a massive gap between their lunch and their dinner, and then they worry about their blood sugar, so they might not want to eat, or they're really tired. But it's definitely fine to have a snack in between as well. But just again, try to think of something with protein that you can tolerate, or something with fiber as well that you can tolerate, and that will make it a little bit better on the blood sugar management as well. Yeah. Chloe?
No, you've covered absolutely everything on that. So the other question that ties into the question on the low histamine diet. So I've been on low histamine diet, Siggy list for 2 months. When is the best time to start reintroducing foods, and what is the best practice to do it, please?
You want to answer that one? I feel like I'm going to go on a tangent about the Siggy list otherwise.
Fine. So I would say the best time to start reintroducing foods is whenever you feel comfortable. I always try and get people to do it as soon as possible. So I generally encourage people to just do the low histamine diet for 2 to 4 weeks. The reason for that is because that should be enough to show us whether it's working. But also from experience, the longer people put these dietary restrictions in place, the more sensitive they become to food. So I think that the shortest time we can do it for, the better. Um, However, saying that, if someone is still having huge reactions, like feeling awful, they're not going to want to start reintroducing. And actually, if we did, we would have no idea what they're reacting to, because their symptoms are also like already really bad. So it depends where you're at in terms of symptom control, medical support, so other things as well. But I would say when you feel you're ready, do start to reintroduce foods. Best practice to do it. It really depends how confident you feel doing it, what the nature of your reactions were before. I would always go with the foods that you feel most confident with. And by that, I mean, you're going to have foods that you are just avoiding because of that list. And you'll probably have foods that you have reacted to in the past, which you have taken out for that reason. So I would go in with the foods you are just avoiding because of a list, start with those. And I would start with tiny amounts, see how you get on with that. And then build up the portion. You could do it. So if you felt confident, you could do like a third of a normal portion day one, double day two, normal day three. However, I would say for most people with MCAS, that's probably too fast. And I would usually do day on, day off, day on, day off, and leave a gap between each days and build up really slowly that way. If you are, it depends on what you're introducing. So Siggy list, I'm going to go on a rant now. Sorry, Cordula.
Please do. I would have done it anyway.
It's really hard because I understand why people follow it, because it looks the most comprehensive list available on the internet, and it's set really nicely into tables. So I totally understand why people do it, in the lack of anything else. But it's not the most evidence-based list. They say they use patient forums and things like that to coordinate this list. And as you know, everyone with MCAS has such different reactions that I don't think that is the best place to gather information on what's high histamine and what's not. So from a Siggy list, if you have cut out beans and pulses, wheat, a lot of nuts, so actually all nuts are fine in terms of histamine apart from pistachios, all seeds are fine. So I would probably start by reintroducing those actual low histamine foods and then gradually build up to the higher histamine stuff. If you're going to do high histamine foods, you want to do them one at a time. And even if you're fine with, say, something like tomatoes, you want to take it back out before you try the next food. Otherwise, you're going to have that bucket stacking effect. So I would do all the single foods you want to do first, and then you can try mixed meals. But often people get more confident the more foods they try. Do you have anything to add to that, Cordula?
No, I just think the Siggy list is really long and confusing, and there's the one with the numbers on it as well, and it's unnecessarily restrictive. And I think it can cause a bit of food fear as well, because just because you've seen it on this list that looks very professional and scientific, you might just have this fear that you can't tolerate something, but really just trust your own symptoms and keep trying to bring those foods back. Because just think of your gut as well and your overall symptom management as well. The longer you keep something out of your diet, the harder it is. And for quality of life perspective, if you have a short list of things you can't tolerate, it's going to be so much easier to manage than the sick list, for example. Yeah.
But also, if you don't manage to get the foods in the first time, that doesn't mean it's game over. Like there will be different situations where you might be able to tolerate that food. I always talk about pollen season because my husband has a horrible time in pollen season and his MCAS is just horrendous. And he has to tighten up his diet much more in terms of histamine, and his other food triggers. Whereas outside of pollen season, he can eat many more high histamine foods and be absolutely fine. Um, or if he was stressed, for example, he might have to tighten up his diet. Whereas actually, if he's relaxed, then he can eat many more foods. So just because you've tried it that once and maybe had a reaction doesn't mean you won't be able to ever eat it again. Um, and if you do find you're reacting to everything, like that is so common at times with MCAS, like do make sure you get medical support to help you if that is the case. Don't just struggle through it alone. If you think it's affecting your nutrition, obviously get support from dietitians. NHS dietitians are definitely becoming more aware of MCAS. Um, and yeah, so do make sure you get that support.
And hormonal impact as well, by the way. So some people struggle more at certain times of the month as well. So keep a little bit of a record. So if you're menstruating at the moment and you feel like you had an absolute terrible reaction at some point, try to link it up with your menstrual cycle as well, just to figure it out. It's all about bringing the foods back if you can. So yeah, try to find everything beyond food as well. Try to think of that, what it might have affected the response.
Great, and we are done with our questions. If anyone has any other questions, then feel free to put them in the chat for the last couple of minutes.
I can just mention the two with the omega-3. So just to let you know, the reason I mentioned the other two is sometimes omega-3s that are vegan do not contain EPA. So just have a look that you have both DHA and EPA in those as well. But all the ones that Jyoti mentioned as well, they're absolutely fine as well. Yeah.
Um, Someone's put a note in the chat, just they thought about what foods I was craving the most and tried them first. Yeah, it's such a good idea. I always ask patients like what food they like to get in. It always comes back pizza, always. Um, so I do talk about how you can make a low histamine pizza as well, like pepper sauce, mozzarella. Like we often do low histamine pizza nights with, yeah, pepper sauce, mozzarella, often chicken, loads of veg. So it is doable even if you can't get histamine back in. But they also said I got 2 to 3 new foods in. I felt so much more confident to try more foods. I also kept a food and symptom diary, and that really helped me. Good luck. So yeah, that's really helpful. Thank you for sharing. What are the best substitutes for milk if you're lactose intolerant and need to avoid soy?
Should I leave that with you and I do the one with the thyroid?
Yeah, of course.
Mm.
So it depends what you're using it for. I would always say make sure you get one fortified with calcium if you're a woman. You want to protect your bone health, and especially if you are going through the menopause or have been through the menopause, get one that has the calcium in it. In terms of protein content, if you need to make sure you're getting enough, then the best next one is oat milk. Um, but apart from that, choose one you tolerate. If you can get calcium fortified ones and are tolerating it, great. Um, yeah. And then, Cordula, can you suggest good foods or supplements for improving thyroid function?
I think that question was made for me. I have a thyroid condition. It literally just flared again this week. So I feel like the question was for me. So I would not look at so much individual foods, but again, look at your overall eating pattern, consider the Mediterranean diet. And then I would really think as well, like, are you deficient in something? So unfortunately, your thyroid really needs most of the nutrients that you're going to get from diet. So iron, zinc, and then the big ones, iodine and selenium. So if your iron and zinc is okay, we talked about those before. Iodine you can become you get from soil and sea, basically. So what that means is it's found in fish and in the UK dairy products, unfortunately, as well. So there is a bit of an issue with people moving away from dairy for choice or because they don't tolerate it. And we actually have much lower iodine content in our diet at the moment, and this may be contributing to thyroid issues. I wouldn't go for iodine supplements. Absolutely not. You can really overdo it as well, so that's not safe. But I would then try and find some seafood that you enjoy. Seafood is a great source of iodine. Have that regularly in your diet. If you're vegan, it becomes a bit more difficult, and I would actually get some personalized support because, again, you can overdo it. You don't want too much, you don't want too little either, but you may need to supplement then as well. Some dairy products come, like plant milks, come iodine fortified, but you really have to start analyzing the label to find it. It's really, really difficult. Just FYI, you cannot test iodine with your GP either, so you do not know what it is. So what I do with clients, I actually go through their food diary and eyeball it a little bit to figure out what it is, but it's really, really difficult. So the only way we can figure it out is somebody does a 24-hour urine collection, and that's how we know if they have iodine in their diet or not. And when it comes to selenium, selenium is in soil, basically. And so the higher the soil of a country, the better it is found in food. But in the UK, we think that most people are selenium deficient. But honestly, I've done a deep dive on this and the research comes from the 80s. Nothing has been updated on this. I spent days on this trying to figure this out. So if you don't have I should say, like actually anyone in the UK, you can try having 1 or 2 Brazil nuts in your diet because Brazil nuts are a really good source of selenium. So if you tolerate them, they're the best source. I, again, would not start supplementing selenium unless you get a bit of support. So sorry, it's a bit of a long answer, but think of your overall eating pattern and then zinc, iron, iodine, selenium, but don't supplement without support, and be super careful with certain things like herbal remedies and that kind of stuff, because it can affect your meds or your thyroid as well. So just be careful with those things.
Great. Last question, but this tags on to the protein one we talked about earlier. I'm vegetarian. My main source of protein are about 200 milligrams of tofu 3 times a week and fat-free cottage cheese about 5 to 6 days a week. I sometimes have cow's milk too. Is this a car crash for historic endometriosis, scar tissue only but previous surgery 10 years ago for stage 2 endo and adenomyosis diagnosed last year? What should I change, if anything?
I'm happy to answer that. Honestly, I think because you're vegetarian, and I think this is okay, to be honest. It is a bit higher than the soy content that I mentioned, but you don't have that many choices, especially if you have other dietary requirements, if you're not able to bring things back. What I would say though, I would also take a little bit of tempeh if you can and just mix it up if you enjoy tempeh. And then if you can bring in some legumes instead, you may have to, you didn't say if you tolerate them or not, but I would then definitely go for some chickpeas, beans, those kind of things, and very, very slowly try to bring them into your diet if you tolerate them, and they will be a fantastic source of protein as well. Corn if you tolerate it. So the frozen, I'm talking here about the frozen. People think like when I say corn, they think of the like fake chicken or the bacon or something, but I really mean like the most basic shape. So like the mince shape in the freezer. See if you tolerate that. Start very small. See if you can increase that. It's corn is a type of mushroom actually. So it is not lab made like some people think. So some people can tolerate it. So just see if you can bring that in as well. I don't Honestly, because you're vegetarian, I would say this is okay. I would just start working on maybe reducing the tofu ever so slightly and bringing in some legumes and chickpeas into your diet if you can. But the cottage cheese, I think it's absolutely fine. Chloe, what do you think?
Yeah, agreed. And yeah, I wouldn't cut anything out until you've got more foods back in. And that's the thing with MCAS, it's really hard, isn't it, sometimes to make changes to diet because actually don't have enough foods in the diet in the first place to maybe cut things out or alter things. So I think prioritize getting foods in and then you can make changes based on that afterwards. Sorry, my brain has completely failed now. Thanks so much, everyone, for coming, and it's been really interesting listening to you as well, Cordula. So thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks so much for everyone for coming and for the additional questions. They were really good.
Yeah, thank you both so much. That was so fascinating and so interesting. I've learnt loads. I really hope everybody has enjoyed that. and got answers to the questions that they wanted. You're both a mine of information. Thank you. Thank you so much for giving up your time. We really appreciate it.